The moment I opened my front door and saw two police officers standing on my porch, I knew Karen had finally lost the last thread of her sanity. No warning, no build-up, just badges, serious faces, and the unmistakable sound of Karen's heels clicking triumphantly somewhere behind them. My coffee was still warm. My morning was perfectly normal. Until it wasn't. The charge? I hadn't attended her daughter's wedding. Not a crime, not a violation, not even remotely anyone's business. But Karen had a way of turning the ordinary into the catastrophic. And somehow, on a quiet Tuesday morning, skipping a neighborhood wedding had landed law enforcement at my door. This is that story. But before we get to the officers, the handcuffs, and the moment Karen's carefully constructed empire came crashing down around her designer heels, you need to understand who Karen is. Not just as a neighbor, as a force of nature. Karen had lived in this neighborhood long enough to believe she didn't just belong here. She owned it. She was the kind of woman who attended HOA meetings with color-coded binders, tabbed and highlighted, as if municipal zoning laws were sacred scripture. She carried a clipboard to her own mailbox. She once filed a formal complaint because someone's garden gnome was facing the wrong direction. Facing the wrong direction. Another time, she circulated a petition to ban wind chimes, claiming they disrupted her mental clarity. 14 people signed it. Out of fear, not agreement. Her personality was built on one simple principle: control everything, question everyone, and treat any resistance like a personal attack on civilization itself. She didn't create drama. She curated it, carefully, daily, with the dedication of someone who had nothing else to lose. If you've ever had a neighbor like this, you already feel your blood pressure rising. And if you're new here, welcome to Prodigy Tales. Subscribe now, because stories like this one don't come around every day. Unfortunately, they come around every Karen. It started, like most Karen catastrophes, with an envelope. A thick one. The kind of thickness that doesn't say, "exciting news." It says, "I have demands." She had walked door to door that morning with the energy of a debt collector on commission, sliding identical envelopes into every mailbox on the street. I watched from my window as she moved with purpose, chin raised, clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon. When I finally picked mine up and tore it open, I genuinely thought it was a wedding invitation. Sweet, neighborly, maybe even thoughtful. I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. The letter informed us, all homeowners, that we were cordially invited to her daughter's wedding. But the word invited was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence, because buried 3 lines down was the first condition: a $200 entry fee per household. Not a donation, not optional. A fee. I blinked, reread it. Still said $200. Then came the gift requirement. No less than $1,000 in value, non-negotiable, with a reminder that cheap gifts reflect poorly on the community. Phones were banned inside the venue for what she called security reasons, though what security risk a neighbor's camera phone posed at a wedding, I'll never understand. And then, at the very bottom, in bold, underlined text, any homeowner who fails to attend will be fined $500 through the HOA. She underlined it twice and added a smiley face. The kind of smiley that felt less like joy and more like a warning from the IRS. I set the letter down slowly and made up my mind immediately. The morning of the wedding arrived like a storm everyone had seen coming, but nobody could stop. By 8 o'clock, Karen was already outside, dressed in a floor-length sequined robe that caught the sunlight like a disco ball with ambitions. She had her clipboard. Of course she had her clipboard. She moved through the street with the authority of a general reviewing troops before battle, checking off names, scanning driveways, noting who was dressed appropriately and who had yet to emerge. I emerged, just not the way she expected. I walked out onto my porch in comfortable clothes, sat down in my chair, and poured myself a very slow, very deliberate cup of coffee. When Karen's eyes landed on me, still home, still unbothered, not remotely dressed for a wedding, something shifted in her face. Not just anger, something deeper. The specific fury of a person who realized they had no actual power over you. I didn't wave. I didn't smirk. I simply drank my coffee and let the silence do the talking. The ceremony came and went, and the next day, The neighborhood felt fractured. Those who attended returned with the hollow eyes of people who had survived something, and those who hadn't quietly braced for whatever came next. Karen came next. She arrived at my porch the following afternoon, heels striking the pavement like a countdown, waving a bright pink slip in the air. $500, she announced, loud enough for 3 neighboring houses to hear. And that's only the beginning. I read it. I looked at her, and I laughed. That laugh cost me everything, and saved me everything too. She didn't stop at $500. That was never the point. The point was submission, and Karen wouldn't rest until she got it. Over the following days, my mailbox transformed into a graveyard of pink penalty slips, each one more creatively absurd than the last. Failure to comply with community standards, disruption of neighborhood harmony, willful disregard of HOA protocol. She was inventing violations the way some people invent excuses, quickly, desperately, and without any real foundation. The numbers stacked. 600, 800, 1,200. She was building a fictional debt and expected me to treat it like a mortgage. Some neighbors weren't as steady. I watched good people, reasonable, sensible people, quietly slip envelopes under Karen's door just to make the noise stop. I understood it. Fear is exhausting. Resistance costs something. But every time I considered the alternative, something inside me refused to move. Because this was never about a wedding. It was about whether Karen could make you believe her rules were real simply by repeating them loudly enough. And I had seen that trick before. Then came the afternoon she appeared on my lawn. Not my porch, my actual lawn. Arms crossed, voice raised, delivering a speech about legal consequences, HOA authority, and her personal relationship with law enforcement. She used the word liable 4 times. She mentioned her lawyer twice. Then she said it, the threat she had been building toward all along. I'm calling the police, and when they get here, we'll see who's laughing. I looked at her calmly, took a slow breath, and said the 5 words that genuinely shocked her into silence. Please, I'm begging you, call. She called them. She actually called them. And I want you to understand, I was not nervous, not even slightly. Because when you know the truth, when you have held every piece of evidence in your own hands and read every fraudulent word she wrote with her own pen, you don't fear the arrival of people whose entire job is to find the truth. You welcome it. The police car pulled up 20 minutes later, slow and unhurried, the way authority moves when it isn't performing for anyone. Karen was ready. She had positioned herself at the edge of her driveway like a prosecutor approaching a podium. Blouse straightened, hair fixed, chin elevated at precisely the angle of someone who believed justice and personal vendetta were the same thing. She gestured toward my house with the dramatic energy of someone revealing a crime scene. I watched from my porch. Still calm, still unbothered, still holding a folder. That folder contained everything. Every pink penalty slip, every threatening letter, every outrageous demand tied to that wedding, organized in the order she had delivered them. When the officers approached me, I greeted them the way you greet anyone arriving to witness something that was always going to end this way. With quiet confidence and a great deal of documentation. I explained everything, methodically, calmly. The $200 entry fee, the $1,000 gift minimum, the no phone policy, the $500 fine for non-attendance, the escalating penalties, the threats on my lawn. I handed them the folder and let the paper do what words sometimes cannot. One officer flipped through the stack slowly. The other turned toward Karen with an expression that had shifted, noticeably, unmistakably, from neutral professionalism to something colder. Ma'am, under what authority are you issuing these fines? Karen opened her mouth, and for the first time since I had known her, nothing came out immediately. Then it did. A rehearsed speech about community standards, HOA jurisdiction, neighborhood unity, and the sacred nature of her daughter's wedding. The officers didn't flinch. They pulled her aside. The questions became more specific, more pointed, and that's when the architecture of everything Karen had built began to collapse, beam by beam, in broad daylight, in front of the entire neighborhood. The investigation revealed what I had suspected but couldn't yet prove. Karen had been issuing fines under the HOA name without authorization. She had forged signatures on official-looking documents. She had threatened residents using fabricated legal language designed to sound real enough to frighten people who didn't know better. None of it was legal. None of it was sanctioned. None of it was anything except one woman's obsession with control dressed up in official stationery. She tried blaming her daughter, then the HOA board. Then, remarkably, she tried blaming the neighbors who had paid her, as if their compliance was somehow the crime. Nothing landed. Nothing saved her. The officers exchanged a look, and then they walked toward Karen with an entirely different energy than the one they arrived with. Watching Karen being escorted to that police car was like witnessing a solar eclipse. Rare, deeply satisfying, and something you never forget, no matter how long you live. The neighborhood stood in silence. Not the silence of shock, the silence of people who had been holding their breath for a very long time, finally, slowly, exhaling. The neighborhood was quiet after that. Not the tense, suffocating quiet of a place waiting for the next explosion, but the deep, genuine quiet of a street that had finally remembered what peace felt like. Lawns that had been abandoned out of fear of Karen's inspections were suddenly occupied again. People sat on their porches. Children rode bikes without anyone filing a noise complaint. Someone even put their wind chimes back up. It was, in every sense, an exhale that lasted for days. The neighbors who had paid Karen's fraudulent fines began the process of reclaiming what she had taken. Not just money, but something quieter and more important than that. Their confidence. Their willingness to simply exist in their own homes without the weight of someone else's manufactured authority pressing down on them. Because that's what Karen had really stolen. Not $200, not $500, but the feeling that your own front door belonged to you. And the moment she was gone, people remembered that it always had. I've thought about this story many times since that morning. About what it actually teaches beyond the drama. Beyond the satisfaction of watching someone's power trip unravel in a police car. And what I keep coming back to is this. Invented authority only survives as long as people believe in it. Karen's fines were never real. Her HOA power was never real. The only thing that made any of it feel real was fear. And the moment someone stops being afraid, the entire structure collapses. That's not just a Karen lesson, that's a life lesson. If you've made it this far, thank you, genuinely. Drop a comment below and tell me which country or city you're watching from. These stories travel further than I ever imagined, and knowing where you are in the world makes every single one worth telling. If Karen deserved everything that happened to her, hit that like button. If you want to see what happens when the next neighborhood villain decides to test their luck, subscribe, because trust me, there is always a next one.